Captain Sarah Chen stared at the view screen in horror. Below them, the planet Kepler 442b was dying, not from war or natural disaster, but from something far worse. The world was being drained of life itself. The exploration ship Defiance hung silent in the shadow of an asteroid, its crew of 12 watching the impossible scene unfold. What had once been a thriving world with billions of inhabitants was now turning gray and lifeless. Cities that had glowed with lights just hours ago were going dark one by one. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures," reported Lieutenant Martinez from the sensor station. His voice shook as he spoke. "Something is pulling energy directly from the planet's surface. Every living thing down there is dying." Sarah had been exploring space for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. 3 massive ships floated above the planet like ancient monuments. They were unlike anything in human records. The vessels seemed to be made of crystal and living tissue, pulsing with strange light. Each ship was kilometers long and shaped like a twisted spear. "Recording everything," whispered Dr. Kim from the science station. "The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever they're doing, it's beyond our technology." On the view screen, beams of golden light connected the alien ships to the planet below. Where the beams touched, entire continents were turning brown and dead. The oceans themselves were changing color from blue to a sickly yellow. Then the communication array picked up a transmission. The voice that came through was beautiful and terrible at the same time. It spoke in perfect English, though how it knew their language was a mystery. "Mortals of the small metal ship," the voice said with amusement, "you witness the feeding of gods. The Etherian collective takes what is ours by right. This world and its people exist to serve us." 3 figures appeared on the view screen. They were tall and graceful, with skin that looked like living crystal. Their eyes glowed with inner light, and they wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself. Each one was beautiful beyond human understanding, but there was something cold and empty in their perfect faces. "I am Luxara, divine harvester of the Western Spiral," said the first figure. She smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. "Your species is unknown to us. How amusing that you have found your way here just in time to witness our glory." The second figure stepped forward. "I am Vorth, keeper of the sacred flame. Your little ship carries 12 life forms. Such a small offering, but every soul feeds the eternal fire." The third remained silent, but watched the human ship with interest that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Sir," Martinez whispered urgently, "I'm detecting movement from their ships. They're turning toward us." Sarah's mind raced. The Defiance was a science vessel, not a warship. They had no weapons that could threaten ships that size. Their only advantage was speed and the element of surprise, but that was already lost. "Dr. Kim, are you getting all of this recorded?" she asked quietly. "Every second, Captain. Full spectrum analysis, energy readings, everything." Below them, the last cities on Kepler 442b went dark. Billions of lives snuffed out in less than 6 hours. The planet that had once been green and blue was now a brown husk, completely dead. The golden beams shut off and the crystal ships began to glow brighter as if they had been fed. "The harvest is complete," Luxara announced. 3 billion souls to sustain our immortal forms. Now, little mortals, you will join them." One of the massive ships began moving toward the Defiance. It moved slowly like a giant predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Energy began building along its crystal hull. "All hands prepare for emergency jump," Sarah ordered. Martinez plot a course back to human space. "Maximum speed." "Captain, they're jamming our systems," Martinez reported, panic creeping into his voice. "I can't lock onto our navigation beacons." The crystal ship was getting closer. Sarah could see details on its surface now, organic growths that pulsed like a heartbeat, and crystalline structures that hummed with power. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. "Dr. Kim, how long until you can transfer all our data to the emergency beacon?" 2 minutes, Captain." "We don't have 2 minutes." The alien ship was almost on top of them now. Sarah could feel the hair on her arms standing up as strange energy washed over their hull. The lights on the bridge flickered and several crew members cried out in pain as something tried to drain their life force. "Martinez, give me everything the engines have. Now!" The Defiance shot forward like a bullet, using the larger ship's mass to slingshot around it. The maneuver caught the aliens by surprise. For a moment, the jamming stopped. "Jump coordinates locked," Martinez shouted. "All hands brace for—" The space around them twisted and folded. The last thing Sarah saw before they jumped was the face of Luxara on the view screen. The alien goddess was no longer amused. She looked angry, and her beautiful features had become something terrifying. The Defiance tumbled out of hyperspace 3 light-years away, alarms blaring and half their systems fried. But they were alive, and more importantly, they had the recordings. "Damage report," Sarah called out as she pulled herself back into her captain's chair. "Hull integrity at 60%, reported Engineer Santos. "Hyperspace drive is completely dead. We're running on backup power only." "Dr. Kim, please tell me you got everything." The scientist nodded, clutching a datapad to her chest. "Every second of it, Captain. Energy readings, ship configurations, their communication frequencies, and the location of what they called their feeding grounds, 17 different star systems." Sarah stared out at the stars, her mind trying to process what they had witnessed. Somewhere out there, beings that called themselves gods were murdering entire planets. They had technology beyond human understanding and the power to drain life itself from worlds. "Set course for Earth," she ordered. "Best possible speed, Captain," Dr. Kim said quietly. "The energy readings I recorded. If I'm right about what I saw, they're not really immortal. They're using some kind of technology to sustain themselves. Technology that feeds on death. You're saying they can be killed? I'm saying they're not gods despite what they claim. And if they're not really gods..." Dr. Kim paused, looking at her data. "Then maybe they can be stopped. The journey back to Earth would take 3 weeks with their damaged ship. 3 weeks to analyze the data and figure out how to fight beings with the power of gods. 3 weeks to prepare humanity for a war they never knew was coming." As the Defiance limped through space toward home, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the billions of people who had died on Kepler 442b. Entire families, whole civilizations, snuffed out to feed the hunger of false gods who thought mortals existed only to serve them. She made a promise to herself and to the memory of those lost souls. Humanity would find a way to fight back. They would make these so-called gods pay for their crimes. The Etherians had made one crucial mistake. They had let witnesses escape. That mistake would cost them everything. The emergency session of the Human Defense Council had been going for 6 hours. Admiral Rebecca Hayes looked tired as she reviewed the data from the Defiance for the 100th time. Around the conference table sat the most important military and scientific minds of humanity, all struggling to understand what they were facing. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," said General Morrison, his weathered face grim. "These aliens, these Etherians, have been destroying entire civilizations for thousands of years. They claim to be gods, and they have the technology to back up that claim." Captain Sarah Chen, now promoted to admiral after her harrowing escape, nodded. "The energy readings don't lie, General. They drained an entire planet in 6 hours. 3 billion people dead, and their ships got stronger afterward." Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's leading expert on alien technology, had been studying the recordings for weeks. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his excitement was obvious. "I've found something," he announced, causing everyone to lean forward. "The energy signatures from their ships show a very specific pattern," Dr. Webb continued, activating a holographic display. "Look at this data from when they were feeding. Their life signs spiked dramatically, but only for a short time. Then they returned to baseline levels." "What does that mean?" Admiral Hayes asked. "It means they're not naturally immortal. They're using technology to extend their lives artificially. Some kind of quantum field generator that repairs cellular damage and prevents aging." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Kim from the Defiance crew stood up. "I've been analyzing the crystal formations on their ships. The energy patterns match what Dr. Webb is describing. The crystals aren't just decorative, they're part of a massive life support system." "So they can be killed?" General Morrison asked bluntly. "In theory, yes," Dr. Webb replied. "But their technology is centuries ahead of ours, maybe thousands of years ahead. Even if we found a weakness, getting close enough to exploit it would be nearly impossible." Unknown to the humans gathered in their secret meeting, their communication channels had been monitored. Deep in space, floating in a ship the size of a small moon, Overlord Zephyros received reports from his scouts. The ancient being had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years, and he found the situation amusing. "So the little mammals think they can understand us," he said to his subordinates. His voice carried the weight of millennia, and his crystalline form pulsed with contained power. "How refreshing." It has been ages since prey showed such spirit. Luxara knelt before her master, still angry about letting the humans escape. My lord, shall I take a fleet to their homeworld? Their entire species could feed us for years. Patience, my child, Zephyros replied with a cold smile. Let them analyze our power. Let them understand the hopelessness of their situation. Fear makes the harvest so much sweeter. Back on Earth, the research continued day and night. Dr. Webb had requisitioned the most powerful computers available, running simulations and models based on the Etherian technology. What he discovered made him call an emergency meeting. I found their weakness, he announced to the assembled council. Their quantum field generators operate on a very specific frequency. If we could disrupt that frequency, they would age and die like any normal being, Admiral Hayes finished. How do we build a weapon that can do that? That's the problem, Dr. Webb admitted. The power requirements would be enormous. We'd need to build a ship specifically designed around the weapon, and even then, we'd only get one shot before they adapted their defenses. The debate that followed was heated. Some council members wanted to try negotiating with the Etherians. Others suggested hiding humanity's existence and hoping the aliens would ignore them. But Admiral Chen had seen what these beings were capable of. They won't ignore us, she said firmly. We've seen their operation, we know what they really are. They'll come for us whether we fight back or not. 3 weeks later, the decision was made for them. The colony on New Geneva, home to 2 million people, went silent. When a scout ship arrived to investigate, they found the same thing the Defiance had witnessed: a dead world drained of all life. The message that followed was broadcast on all human frequencies. Luxara's beautiful face appeared on every screen, her smile cold and predatory. Mortals of Earth, she said in her musical voice, you have seen too much. You have learned too much. The divine collective cannot allow such knowledge to exist among lesser beings. Behind her, the viewer could see the dead world of New Geneva, its cities dark and lifeless. I am coming for you, Luxara continued. Your homeworld will feed my immortal form, and your species will join the countless others who have served their purpose. Prepare your souls for harvest. The transmission ended, leaving humanity in stunned silence. Then the reports started coming in. Long-range sensors detected a fleet moving toward human space. 12 massive crystal ships, each one capable of destroying a planet. How long until they reach Earth? Admiral Hayes asked her aide. 6 months, ma'am. 6 months to build a weapon that could kill a god. 6 months to prepare for a war against beings who had never lost a battle. The odds were impossible, but humanity had faced impossible odds before. Dr. Webb was given unlimited resources and the best engineers in human space. The project was codenamed Prometheus, after the mythological figure who stole fire from the gods. If they were going to die, they would at least make the attempt to fight back. The shipyards worked around the clock. The design was unlike anything humanity had ever built. A ship constructed entirely around a single massive weapon. The quantum disruption cannon took up most of the vessel's internal space, leaving room for only a small crew and basic life support. It's a one-shot weapon, Dr. Webb explained to Admiral Chen, who had volunteered to command the experimental ship. Fire once and the entire power grid will overload. The ship will be defenseless afterward. Will it work? She asked. The simulations say yes, but we've never tested it on a real Etherian. Their defenses might be stronger than we think. As the months passed, more human colonies went silent. The Etherians were taking their time, savoring the fear they were causing. Each dead world was a message. Resistance was futile, but humanity refused to give up. The Prometheus neared completion, and volunteers lined up to serve on what most considered a suicide mission. These weren't soldiers looking for glory. They were people who had lost everything to the Etherians and wanted revenge. Dr. Kim joined the crew as Chief Science Officer. Engineer Santos from the original Defiance mission volunteered as well. They had seen what the Etherians could do, and they wanted to be part of stopping them. Final systems check complete, Santos reported as the Prometheus prepared for its maiden voyage. Quantum disruption cannon is online and ready. Admiral Chen looked out at Earth one last time. Billions of people living their lives, unaware that their entire species hung in the balance. Soon, Luxara would arrive with her fleet, expecting to find helpless prey. Instead, she would find humans who refused to bow to false gods. "Take us out," Admiral Chen ordered. "It's time to teach these so-called immortals what mortality feels like." The Prometheus departed Earth's orbit, its experimental hull gleaming in the sunlight. Behind it, the rest of humanity's fleet prepared for battle. They had conventional weapons that would barely scratch the Etherean ships, but they would fight anyway. In the depths of space, Luxara felt a strange sensation, something she hadn't experienced in centuries. It took her a moment to recognize what it was. For the first time in her immortal existence, she felt uncertain. The Prometheus drifted in the void between Jupiter and Mars, waiting. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of humanity's most desperate creation, watching the sensor displays with grim determination. Behind her, a crew of 30 volunteers prepared for what most believed would be their final battle. "Contact," reported Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. 12 large signatures dropping out of hyperspace. Distance, 2 million kilometers and closing. The Etherean fleet appeared on the view screen like jewels against the darkness of space. Each ship was a masterpiece of alien engineering, crystalline hulls that pulsed with inner light, organic growths that writhed like living tissue, and weapons that hummed with barely contained power. They moved through space with the grace of predators who had never known defeat. "My God," whispered Dr. Kim from her science station. "The largest one is 15 kilometers long. Our entire fleet could fit inside its cargo bay." The human defense fleet spread out behind the Prometheus looked pathetic in comparison. 23 ships total. Destroyers, cruisers, and frigates armed with weapons that seemed like toys next to Etherean technology. Admiral Hayes had wanted to send more ships, but this was all humanity could spare without leaving Earth defenseless. A communication signal pierced through space, and Luxara's beautiful face appeared on every human screen. She looked exactly as she had months ago. Perfect, eternal, and completely without mercy. "Little mortals," she said with amusement, "you have gathered your metal toys to face the power of gods. How touching. I had hoped for more entertainment, but this display is merely sad." Behind her, Admiral Chen could see the bridge of Luxara's flagship. It was grown rather than built, with walls of living crystal and control systems that responded to thought rather than touch. Other Ethereans moved through the space like angels of death, their crystalline forms radiating power. "I am Luxara, divine harvester of the Western Spiral," the alien goddess continued. "I have ended civilizations that spanned 1,000 worlds. I have fed on species that mastered technologies you cannot even imagine. Your resistance is not brave, it is simply ignorant." The Etherean fleet continued its advance. The largest ships began to glow brighter as they charged their weapons. Energy signatures spiked across the spectrum as power that could crack planets was brought online. "Admiral," Torres called out urgently, "I'm detecting the same energy pattern we saw at Kepler 442b. They're preparing to drain our ships. All fleet units, maintain distance and engage at maximum range," Admiral Chen ordered. "Do not let them get close enough for life drain attacks." The human ships opened fire first. Missiles streaked across space, followed by particle beams and plasma cannons. The weapons that had taken humanity centuries to develop struck the Etherean hulls with devastating force and accomplished absolutely nothing. The crystal ships absorbed the impacts without even slowing down. Their hulls rippled like water where the weapons hit, then reformed perfectly. The organic sections actually seemed to grow stronger from the damage, feeding on the energy of the human attacks. "No effect," reported Commander Singh from the destroyer Valiant. "Repeat, no effect on target." "They're not even returning fire." Luxara's laughter echoed across the communication channels. "Is this truly the best you can do? Your species developed such primitive weapons and thought them mighty. Allow me to show you real power." The lead Etherean ship extended what looked like a flower made of crystal and flesh. Energy began building in its center. Not the crude fire of human weapons, but something far more sophisticated. The air itself seemed to bend around the charging weapon. When it fired, the beam moved too fast to see. The human frigate Courage simply vanished, its atoms scattered across space in less than a second. 200 crew members gone without even time to scream. All ships evasive maneuvers. Admiral Chen ordered, but she knew it was hopeless. The Etherian weapons could track and destroy human ships faster than they could run. The battle turned into a massacre. One by one, the human ships died. The destroyer Mumbai tried to ram an Etherian vessel and was reduced to cosmic dust for its trouble. The cruiser New York lasted 30 seconds before a golden beam cut it in half. Each death was clean and efficient, the work of beings who had perfected the art of destruction over millennia. "Admiral, we've lost 17 ships," Torres reported, his voice breaking. "The remaining fleet is scattered and falling back toward Earth." The Prometheus hung alone in space, facing down the entire Etherian fleet. The alien ships surrounded the human vessel like wolves circling wounded prey, their weapons powered down slightly, not from caution but from amusement. "And then there was one," Luxara said, her perfect features showing mock sympathy. "The brave little ship that thought it could challenge gods." "What is your name, mortal?" "I prefer to know the names of those who provide me with entertainment." "Admiral Sarah Chen, Human Defense Forces," came the reply. "And we're not here to entertain you." "Oh, but you are," Luxara replied with delight. "Your species has such spirit. When I drain your homeworld, that passion will make the harvest incredibly sweet. But first I think I'll take you apart piece by piece. I want to see what made you think you could face immortal beings." The Etherian ships began moving closer. Their hulls glowed with the same golden light they had used to drain entire planets. Energy reached out like fingers toward the Prometheus, seeking to pierce its hull and drain the life from its crew. But the Prometheus was not like other human ships. Dr. Webb had designed its hull specifically to resist energy drain attacks. Quantum field generators built into the armor created a barrier that the Etherian weapons couldn't penetrate immediately. "Interesting," Luxara said, her amusement turning to curiosity. "Your little ship has some surprises. But no matter. I have all the time in the universe." More Etherian ships joined the attack. Golden beams lanced out from a dozen directions, each one trying to find a weakness in the Prometheus's defenses. The ship's hull began to heat up as the energy barriers struggled to hold. "Hull temperature rising," reported Engineer Santos. "The quantum fields are holding, but not for long. Maybe 10 minutes before they overload." Admiral Chen watched the tactical display. The Etherian ships had formed a perfect sphere around her vessel, their weapons creating a cage of deadly energy. There was no escape, no clever maneuver that could save them, but she hadn't come here to escape. "Dr. Kim, how close do we need to be for the weapon to work?" 500 meters, Admiral." "Maybe closer. The quantum disruption field has a very short range." "Then we get closer." Admiral Chen turned to her crew. "All hands prepare for ramming speed. Target the flagship." The Prometheus's engines roared to life, pushing the ship forward through the cage of energy beams. The hull temperature spiked dangerously as more Etherian weapons focused on the charging vessel. Warning alarms blared throughout the ship as systems began to overload. "They're trying to ram us," one of Luxara's subordinates reported with disbelief. "A metal ship against a divine vessel. The mortals have lost their minds." "Let them come," Luxara replied with amusement. "I want to see the look on their faces when they realize how hopeless this is." The Prometheus closed the distance rapidly. 5 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 3. The Etherian flagship loomed ahead like a mountain of crystal and flesh. Its weapons tracked the approaching human ship but didn't fire. Luxara wanted to see what these mortals thought they could accomplish. 2 kilometers, 1 kilometer. The flagship's hull filled the view screen, its alien beauty hiding incomprehensible power. Organic growths writhed across its surface like living vines, and crystal formations pulsed with the heartbeat of a god. 500 meters. "Target acquired," Dr. Kim announced. "Quantum disruption cannon is locked onto their primary power source." "Fire," Admiral Chen ordered. The Prometheus shuddered as its experimental weapon discharged. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then space itself began to ripple around the Etherian flagship as the quantum disruption field took hold. Inside the alien vessel, alarms began sounding for the first time in centuries. Luxara felt something she had never experienced before. Her immortality field was fluctuating. "What is happening?" she demanded of her crew. "What are these mortals doing to us?" But her subordinates had no answers. They watched in growing horror as their goddess, their immortal leader, began to change. Tiny cracks appeared in her crystalline skin. Her perfect features started to show signs of age. For the first time in 10,000 years, an Etherian was beginning to die. The scream that came from Luxara's throat was unlike anything the universe had heard in 10 millennia. It was the sound of immortality dying, of a goddess discovering she was mortal after all. The quantum disruption field from the Prometheus had done exactly what Dr. Webb had theorized. It shattered the energy matrix that kept the Etherians alive. On the bridge of the flagship, chaos erupted. Luxara's perfect crystalline form was aging rapidly, millennia of accumulated damage hitting her all at once. Cracks spread across her skin like spiderwebs, and her glowing eyes began to dim. "My lady," cried one of her subordinates, a younger Etherian named Thane. "The mortals have done something to your immortality field. It's collapsing." "Impossible," Luxara gasped, her musical voice now rough and strained. "We are eternal. We are gods. Mortals cannot harm the divine." But the evidence was undeniable. Her hands, which had been smooth and perfect moments before, now showed wrinkles and age spots. Her hair, once flowing like liquid starlight, was turning gray and brittle. The power that had sustained her for countless centuries was failing. Aboard the Prometheus, the crew watched in amazement as their impossible weapon worked exactly as designed. The quantum disruption cannon had overloaded after its single shot, just as Dr. Webb had predicted, but that one shot was enough. "It's working," Dr. Kim whispered, staring at her readings in disbelief. "The field disruption is spreading through their ship's systems. Their power source is destabilizing." Admiral Chen watched the tactical display as the massive Etherian flagship began to shake and buckle. The organic growths on its hull were withering like dying plants, and the crystal formations were losing their glow. More importantly, the other 11 ships in the fleet had stopped their attack and were backing away in obvious panic. "Admiral," Lieutenant Torres reported with excitement, "I'm receiving communication signals from the other Etherian ships. They're not speaking to us, they're talking to each other. And they sound terrified." The alien voices came through the ship's translation systems in fragments. "Divine One is dying. Impossible. Mortals have God-killer weapon, retreat," informed the Overlord. But not all the Etherians were retreating. Thane, Luxara's second-in-command, was young by their standards, only 3,000 years old, and he still burned with the arrogance of youth. As he watched his goddess dying, his fear turned to rage. "Mortals did this," he snarled, his own crystalline form glowing brighter with fury. "They will pay with their species' extinction." Thane took control of the flagship's weapon systems and began charging them to maximum power. The dying ship groaned under the strain, but its weapons were still functional. Energy built up in the crystal formations until they blazed like miniature stars. "All ships concentrate fire on the human vessel," Thane commanded. "Destroy them before they can fire again." The remaining Etherian fleet opened fire with everything they had. Beams of golden energy lanced through space, each one powerful enough to crack a moon. The Prometheus, its quantum cannon depleted and its defenses failing, seemed doomed. But humanity had learned something important in their brief, desperate war against the gods. They had learned to sacrifice everything for victory. The human ships that had survived the initial massacre came screaming back into the battle. The destroyer Valiant threw itself directly into the path of an energy beam meant for the Prometheus, its crew of 300 dying instantly to save their admiral. The cruiser Wellington rammed an Etherian ship at full speed, its nuclear reactor overloading on impact and taking both vessels out in a blaze of light. "All remaining fleet units, protect the Prometheus." Admiral Hayes's voice crackled over the communication system from far off Earth. "That weapon is our only hope." One by one, the human ships died to keep the Prometheus alive. The frigate Swift Shadow lasted 6 seconds against concentrated Etherian fire. The destroyer Iron Will managed to damage an alien ship's weapons before being vaporized in return. Each death bought precious time for the experimental vessel to escape. But inside the Etherian flagship, a more fundamental change was taking place. Luxara's death was not just the end of one goddess. It was the collapse of everything the Etherians believed about themselves. "She's really dying," whispered an Etherian crew member, his voice filled with impossible horror. "The Divine One is actually dying." "We're not immortal," said another, the words barely audible. "If she can die, we can all die." The psychological impact rippled through the Etherian fleet like a virus. These beings had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years based on one simple fact: they could not be killed. They were gods, eternal and all-powerful. Lesser species existed only to serve them because resistance was pointless. Now that fundamental truth was cracking apart. On other ships, Etherian crew members began abandoning their posts. Some fled to escape pods, others simply shut down their vessels' weapons and engines. The sight of their goddess aging and dying before their eyes shattered their confidence completely. Luxara herself was experiencing her final moments of existence. As her life force failed, memories flooded through her mind. Memories of the countless worlds she had harvested, the billions of lives she had consumed to maintain her immortality. For the first time, she felt something she had never experienced before: guilt. "I see them," she whispered to Thane, her voice barely audible now. "All the faces of those we killed, all the children we murdered for our eternal feast. They're waiting for me." "My lady, hold on," Thane pleaded, but he could see it was hopeless. His goddess was crumbling to dust before his eyes. "Tell the Overlord," Luxara said with her final breath. "Tell Zephyros that mortals can kill gods. Tell him to beware the humans." With those words, she collapsed into a pile of crystal dust and ash. The divine harvester of the Western Spiral, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, was dead. The moment of her death sent a psychic shockwave through the quantum field that connected all Etherian technology. Every member of their species felt it, the impossible sensation of a god dying. On ships scattered across the galaxy, Etherians stopped what they were doing and stared in shock at the empty space where Luxara's life force had been. Thane gathered up the dust that had once been his goddess and spoke into the communication system with a voice full of grief and ancient mortals of Earth, he said. His words broadcast to every human ship in the system. "You have done the impossible. You have killed one of our divine kind, but this victory will be your doom. Overlord Zephyros will come for you now, and his wrath will make the death of your species seem merciful by comparison." The remaining Etherian ships began retreating toward the edge of the solar system. Their formation was broken, their morale shattered. For the first time in their long history, they were fleeing from mortal beings. But Thane was right about one thing. Their victory would bring attention they didn't want. Deep in space, Overlord Zephyros felt the death of one of his children and rose from his throne for the first time in 1,000 years. His rage was like a supernova, burning with the fury of an immortal who had just learned that mortality could be forced upon him. Aboard the crippled Prometheus, Admiral Chen watched the alien fleet retreat and felt a mixture of triumph and dread. They had proven that gods could die, but they had also declared war on beings with the power to destroy their entire species. "Admiral," Dr. Kim reported quietly, "long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures moving toward our position." "Something big is coming." "How big?" Admiral Chen asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Bigger than anything we've ever seen. The energy output is off our scales." Admiral Chen looked out at the stars and realized that killing one god had only made the others angry. The real war was just beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare started, humanity had hope. They had a weapon that could kill the unkillable. They had proof that these self-proclaimed gods were nothing more than mortals with better technology. Most importantly, they had shown the entire galaxy that even gods could bleed. News of Luxara's death spread through subspace communication networks at the speed of light. On 1,000 worlds that had bowed to Etherian rule, enslaved populations looked up at the stars with something they hadn't felt in centuries: hope. The age of the gods was ending, and mortality was coming for them all. Overlord Zephyros arrived with the fury of a dying star. His flagship was not just a ship, it was a mobile world. 50 kilometers of crystal and living metal that pulsed with the accumulated power of 10,000 years. Behind him came the full might of the Etherian collective. 300 vessels carrying the survivors of a species that had once numbered in the thousands. The sight of the armada emerging from hyperspace made hardened military officers weep. Each ship was a work of art and terror, grown rather than built, armed with weapons that could reduce planets to cosmic dust. But it was Zephyros himself who commanded attention. The Overlord stood 12 feet tall, his crystalline form blazing with inner fire that had consumed 1,000,000 worlds. He was the first of his kind, the original god, and his rage at losing one of his children made space itself tremble. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Prometheus, watching the approaching fleet with grim determination. In the 3 months since Luxara's death, humanity had worked miracles. Every shipyard in human space had been converted to military production. The quantum disruption technology had been refined and mounted on dozens of vessels. Earth's population had volunteered in unprecedented numbers, turning peaceful cargo haulers into warships. But even with their desperate preparations, the human fleet looked pathetic compared to what was coming. 200 ships against 300, mortal technology against divine power. The only advantage they had was the element of surprise. The Etherians didn't know how many quantum weapons humanity had built. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen," she broadcast to the human fleet. "Today we face beings who have called themselves gods for millennia. They have enslaved entire civilizations, murdered billions, and claimed dominion over all life in the galaxy. But we know something they're just learning. Gods can die." Throughout the fleet, crews prepared for battle. These weren't all military personnel. The cargo hauler New Hope was crewed by civilians from the colony worlds. The converted passenger liner Starlight carried volunteers from Earth's universities. Every human ship held people who had lost friends or family to the Etherian harvest, and they burned with the need for justice. Zephyros's voice echoed across all frequencies when the fleets met between Mars and Jupiter. His words carried the weight of eons, the authority of a being who had never been challenged by mortals. "I am Zephyros, first of the divine, overlord of the Etherian collective," he announced. "Your species has committed an act of such unprecedented blasphemy that the very stars weep in horror. You have murdered one of my children, ended a life that was meant to last until the universe itself died." The massive flagship moved forward, its hull rippling with organic growth and crystal formations. Smaller ships spread out in perfect formation, their discipline unbroken despite the death of Luxara. These were the elite of Etherian society, beings who had conquered the galaxy and would not be intimidated by mortal defiance. "But I am not without mercy," Zephyros continued, his voice carrying mock compassion. "Surrender now, and I will make your deaths quick. Your species will feed my immortal form, and your suffering will be brief. This is the only kindness I will offer." Admiral Chen's response was broadcast on all channels for every ship to hear. "Overlord Zephyros, my name is Sarah Chen, and I speak for the human species. We've seen what your mercy looks like. We've watched you drain entire worlds, murder billions of innocent people to sustain your artificial immortality. You're not gods, you're parasites. And today, we're the cure." The silence that followed was broken by something unprecedented in Etherian history: laughter from the lesser species. Human voices across 200 ships joined in bitter amusement at their enemies' pretensions. It was the laughter of people who knew they were probably going to die but refused to be intimidated. Zephyros's rage exploded across space like a solar flare. His personal fury was so intense that sensitive humans throughout the fleet felt it like a physical blow. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of mercy. "Then you will die as you lived, in ignorance and pain. All ships advance. Show these mortals what divine wrath truly means." The Etherian fleet moved forward in perfect formation, their weapons charging with power that made nearby space shimmer. Golden beams lanced out across the void, each one capable of destroying a city. The first human ships to die were the converted freighters on the flanks, brave volunteers who had never been meant for combat. But humanity had learned from their first encounter. The ships didn't bunch together like sitting targets. They scattered and weaved, using hit-and-run tactics that confused the Etherians. The quantum-armed vessels stayed hidden among the conventional ships, waiting for their moment. "First wave, engage," Admiral Chen ordered. 20 human ships equipped with quantum disruption cannons broke from the fleet and charged the Etherian formation. The aliens, expecting another hopeless gesture like the original Prometheus attack, let them come. It was a fatal mistake. The quantum weapons fired simultaneously, their invisible beams reaching out to touch 20 different Etherian ships. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the screaming started. 20 gods began to age and die at once. Their perfect forms cracked and crumbled as millennia of accumulated damage hit them in seconds. Their ships, powered by their life force, began to shut down and drift. The Etherian formation wavered as commanders who had never known fear suddenly experienced their own mortality. "Impossible," Zephyros roared. "How many of those weapons do they have?" His question was answered when the second wave attacked. 30 more human ships, 30 more quantum cannons, 30 more dying gods. The Etherian fleet was no longer advancing, it was reeling. In shock as beings who had thought themselves eternal discovered they were as mortal as any other living creature. But Zephyros had not. ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years by being weak. His rage transformed into cold calculation as he realized what humanity had done. They had turned the Ethereans' greatest strength, their perceived immortality, into a weakness by proving it false. All ships, maintain distance from the human vessels, he commanded. Use long-range weapons only. These mortals have found a way to kill us, but their range is limited. The Etherean tactics changed instantly. The crystalline ships pulled back and began bombarding the human fleet from extreme range. Their weapons had greater reach than human technology, and they used that advantage ruthlessly. Human ships began dying under the concentrated fire, their hulls cracking under energies that could melt asteroids. The battle became a deadly dance. Human ships with quantum weapons tried to get close enough to fire, while Etherean vessels stayed at long range and picked them off one by one. Each exchange cost both sides, but humanity was losing faster than they could replace their losses. "Admiral, we've lost 60 ships," reported Lieutenant Torres. "The quantum-armed vessels are being targeted specifically. They know what to look for now." Admiral Chen watched her fleet dying and made a decision that would be remembered for centuries. "All ships form up on the Prometheus. We're going to break through their formation and engage Zephyros directly." The remaining human fleet, now reduced to less than 100 ships, formed a spearhead with the Prometheus at its tip. They charged straight at the massive Etherean flagship, accepting terrible casualties to close the distance. Ship after ship died under the concentrated fire of 300 alien vessels, but they kept coming. "He's running," Dr. Kim observed with surprise. "Zephyros is actually pulling back, it was true." The Overlord's flagship was retreating, using its massive bulk to shield itself behind smaller vessels. For the first time in his existence, Zephyros was afraid. He had seen 50 of his children die in a single battle, more Ethereans than had been lost in the previous 1,000 years combined. But Admiral Chen was not going to let him escape. The Prometheus and its escorts punched through the Etherean formation like a bullet, their quantum weapons clearing a path through ships that had never known defeat. They lost dozens of vessels in the charge, but they reached their target. The final confrontation came when the Prometheus faced Zephyros's flagship alone. Both ships were damaged, their crews exhausted, but neither would retreat. This was more than a battle. It was a test of two different philosophies: the artificial immortality of the Ethereans against the stubborn mortality of humanity. "You would face me personally, little mortal?" Zephyros asked as the two ships closed to visual range. "I have existed since your species lived in caves. I have power beyond your understanding." "Power built on the murder of innocents," Admiral Chen replied. "Power sustained by the deaths of entire civilizations. That's not divinity, that's parasitism, and every parasite eventually meets its cure." The two flagships circled each other like ancient knights preparing for single combat. Zephyros's ship was magnificent and terrible, a crystalline cathedral armed with weapons that had ended civilizations. The Prometheus was scarred and battered, its hull patched with emergency repairs, but it still carried the one weapon that could kill a god. They fired at the same moment. Zephyros's weapon was a beam of pure destruction that could have carved through a planet's core. The Prometheus's quantum cannon was invisible, a subtle disruption in the fabric of reality itself.